Actually, Martin, start over. I want that on record.
Yeah, I was saying, I wanted to thank Franklin for having the ERA in Pennsylvania. I just filed a brief in a matter where the Department of Environmental Protection was trying to get an appeal I filed dismissed. And I relied heavily on the Environmental Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania to argue that the EHB has jurisdiction to hear our appeal. So we'll see what happens, but it was nice to have that available and point out that it is being used regularly by environmental attorneys in Pennsylvania.
That is fabulous. I want to get into that after we hear the initial sort of comments from Franklin and Delegate Fisher. So all right, let's start then. I am delighted to welcome you all, friends of the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights. I am Nina Beth Carden, the director, and on behalf of Claire Miller, our communications director, and Deb Harris, who is our volunteer coordinator, and members of our advisory circle, and other friends and volunteers, I am just thrilled to have you with us. And again, we're delighted that Delegate Sheila Ruth is with us. Delegate Ruth, we're just delighted to have your support. And if there are any other legislators who have representatives here or hear themselves that whom I've missed, please do let me know. We're grateful to have any and all of you here. As you know, the Maryland Campaign for Environmental Human Rights is working to establish in the Declaration of Rights of our state constitution the right for everyone to have access to and the enjoyment of a healthy environment. Access to and a right to a healthy environment is fundamental to human life and dignity. It underpins everything else that we do. As I read in a letter to the European Council that's considering environmental human rights amendment, even now, there is no human rights on a dead planet, they said, right? We need a healthy environment for all of us to be able to live out a life of dignity and a life of opportunity. So our job is to make sure that we put in our Constitution, in our Declaration of Rights, the statement that says each person has an inalienable and fundamental right to a healthful environment. And that we say that the state and all levels of government of the state are trustees of the natural resources of the state for present and future generations. That's what we're all about. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because the predecessor of our amendment, the sort of grandfather of our amendment, the one that has inspired so many other states in the United States to put an environmental rights amendment in their constitution, is the state of Pennsylvania. They established their environmental rights amendment way back in 1969 and 70, and it was passed by their voters in 1971. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. And the architect of that environmental rights amendment is Franklin Kury, who amazingly in his freshman years in the House of the Pennsylvania House of Delegates, House of Representatives, in his freshman year, and his, I think it was just second year, Franklin got the Environmental Rights Amendment of Pennsylvania passed. Just goes to show you that freshman representatives and legislators do in fact have influence when it's the right person and the right time. So just briefly, Franklin Kury served in the Pennsylvania legislature for 14 years. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He served as Deputy Attorney General in the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General. He was a congressional aide to the Honorable George Rhodes. He has been a champion of constitutional environmental rights, as you're going to hear, for 50 years. He is the grandfather of the environmental rights movement here in the United States. And as a grandmother, I can tell you there's nothing more satisfying to know that what you did goes on for not just the next generation, but the next generation. So Franklin, you are the one who is inspiring us in this third generation to pursue environmental rights in our state constitutions. He is the author of a book, in case you all want to see it. It is, I hope, the reflection isn't too bad. It's The Constitutional Question to Save the Planet. It is a relatively short book, which reviews the history of state constitutional provisions for environmental rights, focusing primarily on Pennsylvania. But what I didn't realize until I wrote that book is there were, in fact, several iterations in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, to put in our federal constitution an amendment that says everyone has a right to a healthful environment. And Franklin is encouraging us also to consider at some point doing it again, putting it in the federal constitution, a fundamental right to a healthful environment. He is an inspiring speaker. He is a storyteller, as you will hear. He is a wonderful spokesperson for all of us who are fighting on the state's front to put environmental rights in our state constitutions. And by the way, when we started in Maryland with this about 3 or 4 years ago, there were 3 states that were considering environmental human rights in their state constitutions. It was Maryland, Vermont, and New York. Now there are 16 states that are considering it. So this is really a movement that is taking off. The United Nations Human Rights Council is right now determining whether or not it believes it should put environmental human rights in its Universal Declaration of Rights. And we believe that this is the year that it will do that. The Parliament of Europe is considering the same thing. Environmental human rights is an issue whose time has come, and we want to make sure we put it in the Maryland Constitution. In addition to Franklin Kury, we have another extraordinarily exciting, inspiring presenter today, a speaker today, and I'm hoping that Franklin Kury and Delegate Wanika Fisher will be richly engaged in dialogue. So our second presenter is Delegate Wanika Fisher, who is last year's and is coming year's sponsor of the Environmental Human Rights Amendment for us in Maryland. Delegate Fisher has been in the House since 2019. She is on the Judiciary Committee. She is, by all accounts, a rising star. You will see how sort of irresistibly impressive she is. She represents Prince George's County in the 47B district. She is a graduate of Dickinson School of Law, which is in Pennsylvania. So there's this little overlap there. I know Franklin's very proud of the fact that Delegate Wanika Fisher went to Dickinson School of Law. In 2020, she served as the Assistant Majority Leader. She was Assistant State's Attorney in Prince George's County in 2017. She was the Policy and Community Director of Prince George's County Council from 2014 to 2016. And she loved the County Council so much, she is eager to return there. And in fact, will be leaving the House of Delegates after next year so that she can run for Prince George's County Council. So while we are thrilled that you're with us now, we're going to miss you after you win your seat, the County Council in Prince George's County, but we continue to look forward to working with you no matter where your star trajectory takes you, Delegate Fisher. So thank you for being here. Thank you both for being here. I want to start with a question to Franklin, and then I'm going to turn with a question to Delegate Fisher, and then we're going to open it up for a conversation. And for everyone who is with us, please put any of your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and we will be eager to ask questions of our speakers as we can. So Franklin, as I mentioned, you were first elected to the Pennsylvania House of Delegates early on in the late 1960s, and it was during your freshman term that you helped pass landmark environmental bills. You passed a Clean Streams bill, which was the main issue that you ran on, if I'm not mistaken. You helped pass a Surface Mining Act, a coal refuse disposal law, solid waste management law, a state scenic rivers law, and more environmental laws. The legislature was on a roll. Excuse me, the legislature was on a roll. And yet you determined that that was not sufficient, that you needed to do more, that just passing those laws was not going to be enough to secure the environmental advances that we need. So how did you hit upon the idea of a constitutional right for a healthful environment? And again, given such progress in the legislature, why did you think that a constitutional amendment was necessary? And if you were creating a constitutional amendment, where did it have to go in your constitution? So Franklin, let me turn this over to you.
Well, as you pointed out, Nina, I was elected to the Pennsylvania House in 1966 on a pledge that I would fight for a clean streams bill. My opponent was the senior Republican in the House, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, but he had voted against bringing coal companies under the Clean Streams Law. So I made that my sole issue, and we won. In fact, it was the outstanding election in Pennsylvania in '66, the most surprising upset. My picture wound up in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh papers because I was considered the front wave of environmentally concerned legislators. That was when the environment really became a political issue. And in the next few years, a lot of legislators on both sides went to the legislature on environmental issues. So as you pointed out, I was there for 3 terms. And at the end of my first year, I got the idea we need to have more than just bills, because bills can be repealed, they can be modified, but they don't really change the fundamental obligation of government to give people a healthy environment. So that's when my legal and political educations came together. My legal education, I had taken a pretty good course in constitutional law at Penn Law School. I knew something about the subject. And politically, I realized that time was right because public opinion, Pennsylvania voters were really outraged at what had happened to their environment in the last century. So I put the two things together, and I spent the winter of 60, I was elected in 66. I started in late, the second part of that term, drafting an amendment. When I got re-elected in 69 or 68, I introduced it in 69, and we got a lot of supporters. And as you point out, Nina, we were in the middle of what I call the environmental revolution in Pennsylvania. The people were angry at what they had been done to their environment. The legislators on both sides were for it. So I said, well, this is the time to do it. So I introduced the amendment. And the main thing is, when I got it introduced, I had people from both sides supporting it. It was amended 5 times after I introduced it, but that's all right. The main thing is it got through. And in Pennsylvania, it takes 2 sessions of the legislature and then public approval. So we brought it back after it left the House in 69 and went over to the Senate. The Senate put a couple of amendments into it, which I'll explain if you want me to. And then it came back to the House. And the first Earth Day in Pennsylvania history was held April the 18th, 1970. That was a week ahead of the actual Earth Day, but Gaylord Nelson came to town, and he was the main speaker. But just before he spoke, I moved the House approve the Senate amendment. So that did it. And then, of course, we heard Gaylord Nelson speak. But the main thing is, the amendment was then ready to be reintroduced in 1971, which I did. I got reelected in 70. I introduced it in February 1971. The support was so strong, we got through both houses without opposition, went on the ballot May the 18th. And it won 4-1, overwhelming support. Over 1 million people were for it and only 250,000 against it. So it was great. That's how it happened. I could go on and on with the history of it, but let me just say, you ask, where is this an amendment to? This amendment is all called Article 1, Section 27. Article 1 in Pennsylvania's Constitution is the Declaration of Rights. Article 2 is legislative, Article 3 is executive, and Article 4 is judiciary. But the main thing is, by putting it in the Declaration of Rights, we made this a fundamental responsibility of the state government. If it had been in one of the other sections, it would have been just a duty for that section, legislative, judicial, or. But by putting in the Declaration of Rights, we made a revolutionary change in Pennsylvania. We made this one of the fundamental responsibilities of the state government. And that's why it's so important. So, and it means everybody in Pennsylvania who's a public official You can't get elected and take office without taking the oath to uphold the Constitution. So every elected official in the state, whether it's the governor or Supreme Court justice or a county commissioner or state legislator, takes an oath to uphold the Constitution, and that means upholding the Environmental Rights Amendment. So that's why it's so important that this is in the Declaration. I think you should be, I'm sure you'll be doing the same thing in Maryland. You want to put this in your Declaration of Rights. So that's why that's so important. Otherwise, it's not a fundamental obligation. As long as it's a fundamental right, people can go to court to challenge government when it fails to carry it out or when it does it improperly. And the big hammer of this amendment is it gives the average citizen the right to go to court to say you're violating my right to a decent or a healthy environment. That's revolutionary, and I think that's the key to this.
I think you're right. That's one of the big differences between a granular law, which focuses on a particular task that must be performed or a violation that should not be carried out, and something that says we fundamentally change the obligation of government, right? Which is it both changes the entire waterfront. It's a fundamental right, but it also changes the cultural DNA and the legal DNA of a society when you put it in Declaration of Rights to make it a fundamental right over and above individual laws. Delegate Fisher, I want to turn to you because you are known mostly for your work in the Judiciary Committee. You are known for your commitment to equity, to judicial reform, to police reform, and yet you are excited about the Environmental Rights Amendment because you know that your constituents will benefit from this. So can you tell us why you are embracing an Environmental Human Rights Amendment and what you believe it can do for you and your constituents and those of the state of Maryland?
Sure, Nina, can you hear me okay?
Great.
Yes, okay, great. I want to thank, well, before I answer my question, I do want to thank you, Nina and Claire and Barry and just everyone on the group and on the ground who's been working so hard. In case I miss everyone, that's part of this committee to make this happen in Maryland. You know, Maryland, you know, we're always just seen as a blue state, but I always say purple's running through our veins. So it can be hard with certain things. And so I just really, really appreciate that. And it's an honor to share this virtual panel with Franklin Kury, and freshmen do amazing things in the legislature, as I'm a freshman as well in Annapolis. And of course, it's great to see my colleague, Delegate Sheila Ruth, on here with me. And I would say, you know, for me, I think, you know, the nature of my district in Annapolis is quite unique. So I represent the largest immigrant population in the state going to Annapolis, the largest, within that, largest Latino population as well. And I'm a first generation American. You know, my mom is Indian, South African, and my dad is Nigerian Yoruba. And, you know, they came to this country to offer me and my siblings a better life. And I would say, as Nina has said, you really can't have that life without a healthy environment. And I will tell you that I think specifically for me, and I think for other communities of color, not that I can speak for all, the environment is just literally choking us every day. But the issues that those communities are facing, you know, the last 2 years, whether it's like Black Lives Matter, police reform, the housing crisis here in Maryland, Black women are 4 times likely to be evicted than a white male. So, you know, the issues that those communities are facing are just so prevalent that sometimes the environmental issues are taking the back burner when it comes to the community's ability and bandwidth when it comes to attention and advocacy and support. You know, as I say, you know, our sons are literally being killed in the street. So it's hard to also have those same advocates talk about and be focused on the environment. So I do feel like as a legislator who understands how vital it is, and even though, you know, to me, it might not be someone being directly killed by police, but it's a child in my community who's suffering from asthma, right? It's hurting my district and my community at an exacerbated rate. than anyone else. Here in Prince George's County and in the 47th, I have batching plants on one side of my district. I have the Anacostia River that's being constantly polluted. So we have a lot of issues. And I would say that to me, the ability to have a healthy and clean environment that we can thrive on, and that this bill requires every agency and every actor to take that into accountability as they perform their abilities, and also it just increases that environmental decision making on every single level, because I think life is hard and life is complicated, and most individuals are dealing with an intersectionality of identity and of priorities. And so for me, and I think my cross file Senator Obie Patterson, who's also in Prince George's County, he's South County. If you know anything about my county, North County is more urban, more diverse. South County is more rural. We have farms, and a little bit more monolithic, but still very diverse, but not as much as the North. And I think we both are interested and passionate about this bill because it's really affecting our home and our greater community in Maryland overall at a rate that's just unacceptable. And I think having a constitutional amendment as this is going to give that ability, and give lawyers and different advocates the ability, when appropriate, to sue on behalf of residents' interests. You know, it's what's so interesting about advocacy on any level is there's a privilege to it. There's a privilege to be an advocate. There's a privilege for anyone on this who's sitting here with Wi-Fi that works on a Zoom at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, who's not a frontline worker in my district, who's bagging groceries right now, or cleaning a hospital room, or doing construction in my community. So there's a privilege to having a voice. And what I find so therapeutic and necessary about the Environmental Rights Amendment is that it gives that voice and that ability for attorneys, advocates, different groups to be that voice for people that are constantly working and doing other things, and don't have that ability to advocate for themselves, and who are disproportionately affected by private sector and government decisions when it comes to the environment, which that could be a whole other Zoom when it comes to redlining and, you know, where people have housing and the environmental effects and where they're living. And if you're living in, you know, housing that hasn't always been in the best environmental framework for many reasons, and why communities of colors and others tend to be in those situations. So I think it's really, really hard to ask the most vulnerable among us, income, racially, anything, to just be doing double duty. And to me, the Environmental Rights Amendment allows for them to have not only that right that has to be seen by their government and has to be seen by all of us, by any agency, but to allow those to bring lawsuits if needed on their behalf to make things right. And so I really, to me, that's kind of what I would say, not to be long-winded, hopefully that wasn't too long. That's what really motivates me and makes me feel like it's so important. And I'm living it, you know, every day in my district, and it's tough. It's really tough when to talk about environmental issues when, like, I literally was just at a door, my senior next door on my street, and she's talking about, you know, taxes going up in Prince George's, not being able to on a fixed income, you know, afford the healthcare and prescription drug costs she needs. And I'm talking about, you know, our air quality issues, you know. So it's like a lot of it's in North County. So it's a lot of those things all at once, which are hard. And so I think that this amendment's going to fill that gap and just bring better outcomes for all Marylanders.
It is true. Thank you so much. That was very powerful. It is true that not everybody who needs the benefits of this amendment can fight for the benefits of this amendment, and we have to be the allies fighting with and for them, because everybody needs a healthy environment. And you're right, there are others who just do not have the privilege that many of us on this call have, to be able to have the time, the space, the income, to be able to run that fight. So thank you so much for bringing the presence of those others here. And thank you for reminding all of us that for whom and with whom we're really fighting. There is a question, let me turn to the question that Laurie, was it Laurie? No, that Joanne Kraus asked. And then I want to turn to Delegate Fisher and Franklin to see if you two have cross conversation and questions you want to ask each other. But Franklin, the question is, has this Pennsylvania amendment been used at all in addressing the fracking pollution and health effects? And I know that it's been used to fight fracking, but this was, so you can speak a little bit to that as well, but also fracking pollution and health effects. Franklin, do you know if it's been used for that?
Yes, it has. As a matter of fact, in the landmark decision of Robinson Township, in which Robinson Township in southwestern Pennsylvania, Washington County, sued the state on the oil and gas law. Justice Castile, the Chief Justice, wrote the opinion. And the long and the short of it is that he invalidated 2 sections of the oil and gas law, which was written specifically for the Marcellus shale industry. The first provision they invalidated was the prohibition of local zoning. There was no local zoning allowed on fracking. Well, that was invalidated. The second one had to do with health. Doctors who examined people and found a problem because of the relationship with fracking were prohibited under that bill from sharing that information with other doctors or anybody else. And the Supreme Court invalidated that. So that is a direct health issue, which the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, through Justice Castile, invalidated. So it has been, and that's how it's been used. I'm sure there are other cases. There are a lot of cases since Robinson Township, and I haven't practiced law for a few years, so I don't follow the cases like I usst to, but John Dernbach tells me there's a lot of cases out there, and it's all going in the right direction.
Martin, do you want to, quickly before I turn it back to Delegate Fisher and Franklin, do you want to just address that?
Yes, I mean, what Franklin says is absolutely true. While for a number of reasons, there has not been like a direct challenge to end fracking in Pennsylvania using the ERA. There is a lot of things going on dealing with various parts and actions affecting the fracking industry. These things percolate up through from township actions on zoning through complaints to DEP. So there's a lot kind of percolating through the system now that deal with both fracking and gas pipeline construction, which is a big thing in Pennsylvania right now.
Right, so I think it's important for all of us to know when people ask us, well, what good is the amendment going to do? Like, what impact is it going to have? Often what people are asking is what court cases have been won? What are the Supreme Court decisions based on the constitutional amendment, mostly in Montana and Pennsylvania, which have the best records. But there's often these smaller, there's lower level, often invisible and difficult to capture impacts and influences that the amendment has had based on, Martin, as you know, Martin is a Pennsylvania lawyer, on issues, as you say, of zoning, of permitting, of regulators rewriting local regulations in order to be in compliance with the amendment. So the amendment has tremendous impact percolating through the entire system, way beyond even the court cases, the marquee court cases that we know about.
Well, let me just add something there.
Please.
The court cases are terribly important because that's really what defines what the amendment means. If the courts won't enforce it, it doesn't mean anything. But ever since Castile wrote the Robinson Township decision and told the courts of Pennsylvania to read the English language when they interpret it, that has really changed it. And there have been lawsuits. The big lawsuit, of course, is a PEDF case where the state legislature had taken money which was earmarked for conservation purposes out of the oil and gas fund and put it in the general fund budget for general purposes. They went to court and the Supreme Court said that was illegal. It was a violation of the trusteeship responsibility. So that was showed that they can do things to stop what the legislature was doing that was wrong. But beyond the court cases, these Amendment has changed the way people think about it. They say, hey, I've got a right to a decent environment. So it creates a public enthusiasm, which was lacking before. The other thing it does, everybody who now wants to affect the environment with their project, regardless of what they think of Article 1, Section 27, has to be aware of it, and they do check to see how this affects the environment. Right after the amendment took effect, even though there were no court decisions, the Department of Environmental Resources had a Module 9. If you were going to file for an application that affected the environment, like a pipeline or a dam or anything else like that, you had to fill out this form showing how you were going to impact the environment. Now, that's the attitude everybody's taking now, because they got to check these things out. They know the environmental amendment can be used to block them. So they're much more attentive to this. And the main thing is people realize they've really got a fundamental right, just like their right to go to the church of their choice or not to go to church, the right to free speech, the right to assemble. This is in that category. And that's terribly important for the future of us here on Earth for the next several generations, with climate change being what it is.
So we have another question. One is, this is from Laurie, it says, how do you counter the concern from the opposition that the amendment will lead to a flood of lawsuits, particularly against the state?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be a flood of lawsuits, but that's the whole point. How else can people assert their rights if they can't go to court? I mean, that's the civilized way to resolve differences. You go to court. You don't go arm yourself and get violent about it. You go to court. And I don't know there's a flood of litigation, but there has been litigation. Thank God there is, because that's what established the meaning of it. It's what knocked out 2 sections of the oil and gas law. It's what stopped the legislature from using environmentally focused funds for other purposes. That's how you make it work. Look at the First Amendment. How many cases do you have of violating of the right to free speech, that kind of thing? That's the ultimate check. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that's what it's there for, to have a check on government, to make sure it's doing what we want, not the other way around.
Delegate Fisher?
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, well said. And I think the other aspect of it is, I think in politics, there's always the opposition's perspective, and then they fixate on certain potential negative aspects. I think one, when you look at Pennsylvania and other states that do have this, it's not a crazy amount of litigation that like our judicial court system or the judicial economy couldn't handle. And then I would say I think it's going to mitigate a lot of issues. I mean, I'm a low-level attorney, but I'm not arguing in front of the Supreme Court or anything, or the Court of Appeals even. But I will say, usually attorneys on either side will find ways to settle cases, and so whatever the dispute actually is being sued on, there's going to be a lot of settling, right? Rather than doing the entire entire case with the full jury and everything else. So I think there's that aspect, and I think there's also preventative. If you get very detailed here in Maryland, there was legislation brought forward for basically the asbestos docket of Baltimore. There's just so many lawsuits. There's like one circuit court judge that does it, and they were trying to have judiciary like streamline those cases. And there are hundreds of cases basically with asbestos issues in Baltimore. So I would say that, like, hopefully, in my perspective, my counter argument to that in our legislature, and for opposition that brings that forward, or colleagues that are concerned, I would say that I think issues like that, and like specifically what Baltimore's going through with that docket, will hopefully be mitigated beforehand, because of this will actually be on our books and a part of our inalienable rights as Marylanders, to prevent litigation as such as this. So that would be my really everyday practical response to that. And I also would say is, this is not like the public defender's office, which if you're low income or whatever, the state pays for an attorney. It takes money to bring litigation forward. So again, there's also the barrier when it comes to cases of in whatever organization, maybe, you know, whether, let's say, the ACLU as an example, right, brings suits for individuals, class action suits. It takes money and bandwidth and time to put a case together that's legitimate, that's worth your time to really sue on this amendment with real harm. I don't think you're going to see millionaires and billionaires lining up to spend money to sue the state for their own economic interests. It's really going to be individuals that are um, hurt by a certain state policy or a certain private actor or something to really bring litigation like that forward. This is expensive. I mean, something on your environmental rights amendment, that's going to be. I mean, I'll refer to Mr. Kury or other experts. I mean, you're going to need at least like 4 to 5 expert witnesses. That's expensive. I mean, to say that this is hurting someone's environmental rights. This is not cheap litigation. And so to act like it's going to flood our court system is just totally a falsehood when it comes to the caliber of a case that's going to really have um, grounds and posture to be successful. So between the cost of it and the fact that I do think things will get settled before court to reduce cost for both parties, whether it's the state being sued or a private actor, whoever, I think that concern is pretty false.
I want to point out Matt's comment, which I think is wonderful. So thank you, Matt, for that. Matt, again, is a lawyer on our advisory circle. And before I get to Veronica, your question, I just want to tell everybody who hasn't heard this from me already that the University of Maryland Environmental Law Clinic a few years ago did an assessment of the 5 states that have had environmental rights amendments in their constitutions for almost 50 years. Pennsylvania was one of the first. There has been no floodgate of lawsuits in any of those states. We are now doing a more granular assessment of, in fact, what the lawsuits that were brought were all about, who brought them. I have a funny feeling, Delegate Fisher, that what we're going to find is that there were very few individuals, in fact, who brought them for all the obstacles and the reasons for the obstacles that you mentioned, that they are mainly NGOs that brought these lawsuits, and NGOs have limited capacity and resources to bring in lawsuits. So it's not that easy to bring lawsuits. And I think we do have good answers there. Veronica, before I get to you, I want to again go to Franklin and Delegate Fisher. One of the other challenges that we have is we hear about is that, well, the language is too broad. So there's a constitutional provision, constitutional right put in our Declaration of Rights, and yet people are saying that the language is too broad. Franklin, can you begin and talk about why the language in the Declaration of Rights are constructed the way they are?
Yes, because a broad policy statement is drafted so that it can last indefinitely. The more specific you make it, the more brittle you make it. And take, for example, in Pennsylvania with our Article 1, Section 27. What really motivated that was what the coal industry and the steel and railroad companies had done to the state for the past century. But when we drafted the amendment, I specifically did not include the railroad companies, the coal companies, or anybody else in there. We kept them out of it. We said there's a basic right here. We didn't mention climate change. We never heard of it at that time. We didn't know anything about oil and gas at that time. But the amendment is so broadly drafted that now it can apply to the oil and gas business. It can apply to, it does apply to climate change. If it were narrow, that wouldn't happen. Look at the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. That didn't deal with subjects like how you regulate television or social media and all that. It just was a broad general statement. And now all these other subjects can be challenged or discussed under this amendment. But it must be broad. And I can't emphasize that too much. It must be a broad policy statement that will cover a lot of ground and let lawyers and judges figure out exactly what it means. You can't do that in an amendment. This is not that specific. And that's why.
Right. And lawyers and judges and the legislature. We want the legislature then to pass laws that also spell out. That's their job. So I want to go to Veronica, and then Martin, I want to drill down a little bit more into your comment too. Veronica asks, how will the Environmental Human Rights Amendment help Marylanders ensure that state agencies do what they're supposed to do? I know that Veronica is fighting issues in her own backyard, literally, and getting frustrated that state agencies are not enforcing the laws as they need to. Currently, she says it's difficult to hold state agencies accountable when existing laws are not enforced or adhered to. Either Franklin or Delegate Fisher, how can an amendment like this help people make sure that the state does what it's supposed to do?
Juanica, do you want to go on that?
Sure, I'll go first, Mr. Curry, and then you can go. I think it's going to help ensure that the state does what it's supposed to do because they know that litigation may or may not be pending on what they're going to do. I will say, for Maryland, and I'm sure Delegate Ruth will also attest to people sort of forget, we're a very heavy governor state. We have a part-time legislature, unlike Pennsylvania. We are all supposed to have other jobs. We are only a 90-day legislature. Our governor has total control of agencies. We can review. We just recently were able to, pass a bit more budget. I can get into the details of that bill, but a little bit more budget ability than we did. But that will only take effect next governor. So having this as an accountability measure is critical, especially in a state like Maryland, where your agency is depending on the priorities and like the direction of the governor and the agency direction. You really do need this, I think, to keep the actions accountable and the policies that agencies are really writing every day, whatever they're regulating, whatever the permit process is, all of those things, truly, I think, accountable and in general and with state governments or local governments, but more specifically, I believe the need is even more needed in Maryland, in which our state laws anyway, obviously local government's full time, but our state, is really run a lot by the governor, and we are a part-time legislature. So that dynamic, I think, increases the need for something like the Environmental Rights Amendment, in my solo opinion. I don't know what Delegate Ruth would say, but that's what I believe.
Well, I would say that Wanika is exactly right. With this amendment and part of the Constitution, state agencies and the governor have to act knowing that they can be challenged in court if they violate people's fundamental rights. Just like they'll be challenged in court if they try to do something to limit freedom of religion or freedom of speech. It's the same threat that's out there, and I think that's critical to keeping them doing the right thing by the environment and people's rights. So I think Wanika is right, and I think this would be very beneficial in keeping the government in its proper role.
Martin, tell us a little bit more about what you're saying when it's not only individuals who bring the ERA cases, but you represent businesses who are using the Environmental Human Rights Amendment in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, sometimes non-lawyers are surprised to hear that corporations are people also, and certainly are covered by and have courts of ruled constitutional rights. Again, we always assume when we're talking about the ERAs that it's going to be individuals fighting for their rights, but the case I mentioned at the very beginning of our session today, I represent two businesses where the Mariner East oil or gas pipeline was constructed across their property. They had returns during the construction of drilling fluids that damaged stormwater basins and causing sinkholes and cracks in foundations and buildings and things like that on their property. They significant amount of property damage. Made a complaint to DEP. DEP originally told the companies they had to fix it, and then for some reason changed their mind and didn't explain why. We filed an appeal of that determination. The department says you can't review our decision, it's our enforcement discretion. And we said, well, no, that may have been good law in the past, but now we have a revitalized environmental rights amendment. You need to do more than what you've done. Old case law is no longer good case law. And relying on the ERA to do that. And again, these are businesses. they suffer property damage. They have interest harmed by environmental damages. So again, I think that's an argument. People say it's just going to be individuals out there. The business community is impacted by environmental damage. Municipalities by climate change. As we all know, they have to sink incredible amount of money into resilience in defending against the impacts caused by climate change. We are hoping that they will become active participants in ERA litigation in the future.
Great, thank you. Franklin, as you mentioned, 1969, 70, 71 was the heyday of environmental activism. In fact, it was the heyday of not only bipartisan, but nonpartisan environmental activism. The Cuyahoga River had been caught on fire. It was Pennsylvania was awakening to the fact that the fuel industries and railroads and others had been wreaking havoc across the state. There was a zeitgeist to do something, and you were elected to do something, and you did do something that was enduring. We're in a different era now. What is it going to take, do you think, for us to pass an environmental human rights amendment in our current era?
Well, I think it's going to, you can't do it the way I did it, because as you point out, the tide was so strong and they got bipartisan support and they had some work to do, but it wasn't impossible. Now it's harder. It's not impossible now either, but I think you've got to be much more aggressive and you got to show public support. And my recommendation would be that when you get this bill ready to be introduced, that Wanika and the others there, do it with a bang, hold a big press conference, have all the supporters there, get everybody lined up in advance and get the ball rolling that this is critical. And what drives it now is climate change. That is ongoing. When we did it, the coal companies are pretty well expired. The damage was there, but they were pretty well gone. Now it's different. Now the climate change is a damage that is ongoing and continuous. So you got to alert people and tell them, look, if we don't take this action now, there's one way to help stop it. So I think you need to get an enthusiastic champion like Wanika to go in there and lead the fight, and to get all the support you can from legislators, of course, and beyond that, the environmental groups of the state. And I know you've got a lot you've been working on. You're all represented in this group today. You got to do a lot of homework before you introduce it, but then when it gets introduced, you got to have people there to show the public what kind of support you have, and just keep pushing.
Delegate Fisher, what do you need from us? How do we help you get this across the finish line?
Oh, a lot. I think, yes, I echo Kury. I think a public support and something visual. I'm sure Nina and Claire and all of us will work offline to figure out a sort of press conference situation. I think with COVID getting better, or not, COVID becoming more manageable, I should say that, with gathering will be easier. I think, Mr. Kury, the last 2 years when it comes to advocacy has been tough because we've been virtual, and it's been a very weird way to advocate in Annapolis. And if the politicians want to ignore you, they can, because they didn't log on to your Zoom, or you didn't get time in their office or whatever, and we couldn't physically allow the public for about a year and a half. We ended session, this last session was totally virtual. The session before, we only went halfway through, all of our bills died. All we did was pass the budget and skedaddle. So it's definitely been a weird 2 years in carrying the bill, in trying to have it be a focus amongst the background of a pandemic. I do think that the pandemic will lend an opportunity of how critical our environment is and our health is, which we can see. And so I think the more I'm going into this session figuring out, and I guess I've just been in my downtime trying to think, I haven't even shared any thoughts with Claire or Barry or Nina or the rest or Senator Patterson yet, but how to correlate this bill with COVID. Because that's what people can relate to and know and taste. And, we have 500,000 Americans dead and counting. And I just, I'm trying to figure out how I can mentally, emotionally, and policy-wise connect this to the pandemic. And I think all of you contacting I'm working on trying to figure out where the bill's going to go. And then I think contacting different legislators in the committees of jurisdiction. And I think contacting the speaker's office and President Ferguson's office on how important this is. I think, Mr. Kury, just to give you a little insight on Maryland, you know, it's not always that we have the votes, you know, we are Democratic majority in the House, and the Senate, you have to pull them along, but they're there. It's really the will. I mean, we've got the numbers, but we have a lot of, we would say in our state, which is mostly Pennsylvania Dems anyway, we have a lot of blue dog Democrats. So it can hurt them, you know, on their reelection, but we have the majority in both chambers. So it's really about, as well, leadership and the caucuses feeling that this is important and feeling that this is worth putting ourselves on the line for. And then the dynamic is we have a Republican governor. Sometimes he vetoes, sometimes he doesn't. It depends on the bill. And this upcoming session, it's hard to overturn any of his vetoes because our Constitution says it has to be the legislature that was in Annapolis basically when the veto was issued. So if he vetoes, you know, you have to, something has to be so crazy important that we'd reconvene the session after primary elections before the new legislature gets sworn in January to overturn anything he vetoes. So basically it's almost like you can't really overturn his vetoes really. I mean, it would have to be something like really, 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 really critical. So I think all those dynamics are playing into this upcoming session. I mean, you know, Governor Hogan's very interesting. You know, it's something, you know, he lets things go sometimes, sometimes he doesn't. It's hard to always read the tea leaves in the governor's mansion. But you know, I would say those are the things I'm thinking about. Those are the things that we need from all of you. And I think it's also a synergy. I think you know, I say this when it comes to criminal justice in my home committee of judiciary. A lot of advocates have like a million different priorities. And I think what I would love this group to work on, whether it's with Sierra Club, other partners, you know, legal conservation voters, that this is the priority. I think what the other side does really, really well, that I've noticed in my short time in politics, even though I'm against what they're saying, I know what they're saying. If you had to tell me, if you just ask me, just like I'll give you judiciary as an example, like what's the main priority for a public defender's office and like ACLU, you know, big, I would say like more left or more progressive, how you want to view it, criminal justice advocates, they've got like 15 priorities. I do not even know the top 3. And that's sometimes the problem with that side, the left side, or however you want to view it. I don't like all the labels, but that side of the aisle is, we all want to do so much, but sometimes we need to just center on like what our priorities are. And when it comes to like political currency, elected officials in Maryland should know the Environmental Rights Amendment is like #1 or top 2 environmental priority of the state, period. Not these like 1,000 trillion bills. And that can be hard because then what you're doing is you're letting us as the legislature tell you what the priorities are, because we're going to pick amongst them, and more likely than not, we pick the easy ones, you know? So I think that is something that we have to work on with the coalition. And like, I know everyone wants their bite on the apple. Everybody wants their bill. Everybody wants, but like for us to really win this, I think we need to be a little bit more focused and a little bit more refined, that the Environmental Rights Amendments is the environmental bill priority with maybe 1 or 2 others, you know? So that's what I would say. I think we need going into the upcoming session. And, you know, I also will flag for this group, and maybe this is a little technical, Nina, for this kind of call, you know, we do have the special session coming up in December. We will be there to redraw lines for congressional maps. I think, you know, having a presence, you know, it's cold, but, you know, making sure, you know, I don't know about being outside, but having a presence during special session, even before we get to January, would also be super helpful because we all will be stuck down there for about a week. I don't think the dates have been made public yet, but when they are, you'll know them, and I'll share them once Speaker and Mr. President make those dates public. But everyone does know that we are going back for special session because Congress wants their lines as soon as possible. So I think that would be also a great time to do some pre-advocacy work before we're back for the full 90 days.
We will keep in touch with you and we will follow your lead in that. That sounds like a wonderful invitation for us to pursue. Thank you. Those were wonderful points. And I'll point out to everybody that in the chat, Rebecca Rear did respond to some of the intersections between COVID and the Environmental Human Rights Amendment. And while we didn't speak directly to environmental justice in this call, Delegate Fisher did refer to it, I think, in her opening comments. And one of the other issues that we believe the Environmental Human Rights Amendment will help us adjudicate much better than we do now is a response to environmental injustices and making sure that there is equity in our environmental behavior. And both in the policy of private industry and also government. We are at the 1 o'clock hour. Delegate Fisher, thank you so much for your passionate comments. We're grateful. Franklin, do you want to take 30 seconds just for a final farewell to us and charge to us?
Well, I want you to move forward because this is critical to Maryland and it's a step forward for the United States. And I admire what you're doing. If there's any way I can be of help with my Pennsylvania experience to you or to Wanika, you can feel free to call me on my cell phone. I hear my number. It's 717-877-8874. And my email is all small caps FLKURY5@gmail.com. Now, I'm sensitive to the fact that Maryland and Pennsylvania are different and all politics is local, so your politics is different than ours. But I may be able to give you some benefit of my experience because the legislative process has a lot of the same principles regardless of where you practice it. So I wish you well, and I'm here to cheer you on. And if you need any benefit of my experience, I'll be glad to share it. So keep going and good luck.
All right, Delegate Fisher, thank you for championing us here. Franklin Kury, you are an inspiration to us all, and we will definitely take you up on your wonderful offer to continue to help us get this over the finish line this coming year. That is just wonderful. Thank you all for participating. You will get a copy of this recording in the mail, in the email. Share it with everybody you know. We are going to need you. As wonderful as Delegate Fisher and Franklin Kury are, and Delegate Ruth, you are going to be the ones who would determine whether or not we can get this passed. We need you to continually be engaged, to continue to reach out to your legislators often. Even now, even though we don't have a bill number yet, even have the final language, you can reach out and say, an environmental rights amendment is coming down the pike. You want them to support it. Please do all that you can to help us. Make sure you're signed up with us. You can go to mdehr.org on the Take Action link and sign up to make sure you receive additional outreach and updates. And we look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you all. Please stay safe and let's keep in touch. Thank you all. Thank you, Franklin. Thank you, Delegate Fisher. Thank you, Delegate Ruth. Thank you all for attending. See you later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.